You are a medical student, you know the pain of anatomy, and at Imperial, for your first 2 years, which are your preclinical years, you have to study anatomy quite extensively, go to dissection sessions, which are actually quite fun, but sit a anatomy spotter, which is, I think, the hardest exam in my opinion. I was fortunate enough to have done well, or alright, like I'm in third year now, so I did alright on them, and I'd like to pass on some of the tips that I had for revising anatomy, because I certainly know that when I started, I had zero idea of what to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why anatomy has its reputation at medical school, and just some of the easy things you can do to make life a little bit easier for yourself. So if that sounds like a good idea to you, and even if you're not a med student, but you just want to hear more about like what anatomy is, because it's quite highly spoken about, let's get into it. So, anatomy, what to say? It's hard, it's really hard. The reason why it's really hard is, what it is you're expected to basically be able to identify parts of the human body, not only that, but also differentiate them from one another, and also know facts about them. And that sounds easy because you think, oh, brain, heart, kidneys. No, it's not that easy. It's not just brain, heart, kidneys. It is like every single muscle that you have, and you have a lot of muscles. Every single vein, vessel, artery that you have a lot of those. Nerves, lymph nodes, bones. You know, the more you think about it, the more it becomes complicated. So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. But there are a lot of ways to make things easy for yourself. The reason why people struggle with it is because technically it's really hard to structure revision. Like if you were studying just like bioregulatory systems, which is physiology basically, you just make Anki cards and you read textbooks, slides, and just memorize the information. With anatomy, it's different because the way you're tested is a spotter, and I should have explained what a spotter is. It's where you get an image of an anatomy dissection, an arrow pointing to something that says, what is this? Or what nerve supplies this? Or what artery runs to the left of this? And that means that you can't just memorize stuff, you have to be able to identify, visualize, and remember things about that particular structure. But it's really helpful because when you get to placement, you might think, I'm never going to use this information, but you will. When you go to surgery, you definitely will, because you'll be expected to identify things in a surgery. And yeah, it's a really helpful tool, and you should be fairly comfortable with some anatomical concepts relatively early on. It is hard though, I'm not gonna lie, and one of the main reasons is because there's just so much to learn. Like I said, you've got to learn loads in a short period of time, and yeah, that's why people struggle with it. But there are some things you can do to make it easier. The first thing is to understand what anatomy learning entails. So you should be using a different approach to anatomy compared to your physiology or BRS or systems, whatever you call it. With anatomy, you should be focusing on visualizing more than memorizing. The reason is, when you visualize something and understand the reason for why it's there, it makes it a lot easier to remember it rather than just rote learning a bunch of names of like organs. So, for example, if you're learning the, vessels that go into the liver, you want to learn not just the names of them, but you want to visualize them. So get an image up of them, see them, and actually comprehend what's going into the liver. So you want to think about the hepatic artery, the hepatic vein, the common bile duct, the various other vessels that come in and out of the liver. You want to actually be able to compute these things, and you want to understand why they're there. Now, once you've actually seen this, you should be applying a very simple technique that you probably learned in school that you haven't touched since. See, cover, draw. And this is really simple. It's boring. It's very boring, yes, but it's a really effective way of doing it. So once you've seen this, you should be covering it up, or closing it, or shutting your laptop, drawing it out on a piece of paper, and all that does is it just really helps cement that information in your head. Don't worry about like labeling every single thing, but just drawing what it looks like, so that when you come to the exam and you see an image, you can think back to what you were drawing and say, hey, this looks like that, this must be an image of the liver, and the vessels entering it and exiting. Now, once you've done that, that's your real basic level of knowledge in anatomy. So you should be able to just sort of not draw everything from memory because you're not a textbook, but like at least draw a very simple diagram of things, a very basic diagram that shows you what's going on. Not of everything, but like the main things, like the heart, maybe the vessels that, for example, supply the heart. You don't need to actually draw a perfect diagram of the heart. You just need to draw like a very simple diagram. So a nice one is here from Teach Me Anatomy. This is a really good diagram because it's basic, but it covers everything you need to know about the vessels in the heart. So if you draw this, like, you're pretty much good. So things like that are really easy to just come up with, and they just make sure that you're understanding the visualization of the anatomy, not just the rote learning. People say, how do you see things? Well, you should use apps like Teach Me Anatomy. They have great diagrams that you can take inspiration from. Online dissections, Google Images is plenty, or use like an app. Complete Anatomy is what we have at Imperial. Perfect for this kind of thing because you can literally choose what you want to see and visualize. It's 3D, you can rotate it, you can make cuts into it, you can choose to focus on particular parts of structures. So it's just really helpful, and if you need to see a structure, use those resources, they're really good. But that's not all anatomy is. So once you can identify a structure, unfortunately that's not all they expect you to do. They also expect you to know secondary information, is what I like to call it. So secondary information is basically things like what nerve supplies this, what artery supplies this, what vein drains this, what lymph node does the lymph from this structure drain into, what was the embryological derivative of this. And these are really where the real marks come in, because they will rarely ask you, what is this? That's a really simple question. So the way to do this is also not just to rote learn names of arteries and veins, but also to come up with systems. So you should be learning structures that are close to each other, because you'll find that one artery might supply a lot of different structures. For example, in the digestive system, you've got three main arteries: the celiac axis, the superior mesenteric, the inferior mesenteric. Don't worry about the names, this is not an anatomy lesson. But what happens is these arteries actually supply structures descending downwards. So, for example, the superior mesenteric supplies a particular structure down to a particular structure. The inferior mesenteric supplies another structure down to another structure. So all of the organs in that area are all controlled by one artery. So if you just memorized it, based off a random name that you had no idea what this artery actually was, you would be lost. But if you actually thought about what this artery was, where it is, other arteries around it, does it supply many organs, and if you actually learned it as a group of structures, then it's far easier. So that's just an easy way of learning these things and viewing structures as groups of structures rather than individual isolated organs or tissues or muscles. What I'm saying is not a style of memorization or a special way to learn things, but it's more the way that you're approaching anatomy should be finding patterns, finding groups, making things easier for yourself basically, not resorting to loads of rote learning. Yes, there's going to be some rote learning that you need to do naturally, but a lot of anatomy is just pattern finding really at the end of the day, and sorting things into groups. And doing that makes it easy for yourself. It just means that you don't have to memorize a lot, and you don't have to memorize a lot. If you make it like a language, like a code system, it's very easy. It all makes sense at the end of the day, and it's meant to make sense. That's what anatomy is. So it makes it easier, and that's really the approach that you should be taking for anatomy. And obviously once you've done all this, once you've understood the anatomy at primary level, then obviously you can make your own Anki cards. People confuse themselves over how to do Anki. Very simple, you just make flashcards on like names. And to practice the actual spotters, so identifying structures, use question banks, use things like anatomy atlases, things like Rowan's Anatomy is perfect for this, McLean's Anatomy Atlas, I think there's one like which begins with W that I can't remember, WOL something. I'll put all the textbooks here, you can get them all, their university might supply you with them, which is great. And yeah, like I said, the information that you need is all there. You don't need to memorize loads, but you should be finding patterns, organizing things into groups, and basically going from there. If you start to do that, you'll find that anatomy actually starts making sense very quickly. A couple of other just very quick tips and tricks I'd recommend. Spend 50 minutes on it per day, or at least per every 2-3 days. If you let anatomy build up, you will struggle, because it's one of those things that you just can't cram for. If you do it like every few days, it's so much easier. Like, it makes life a lot easier because you build up that knowledge day by day. And that applies to pretty much every module that you study. Also, the knowledge that you are required to memorize can be quite confusing. So I always say use Teach Me Anatomy. That's a good guide of what you need to know. It's simple, basic, concise, and if you know what's on Teach Me Anatomy, you're fine for any exam. Like, trust me, you're going to be fine. Also, use question banks like PassMed to apply the knowledge to real life questions. So not just like, what is this structure? What nerve controls this structure? What blood controls? What artery supplies this artery? Which supplies this artery? There are other real life questions. Those questions are more likely why you're going to be using anatomy in real life, and also they're a little bit different to just purely doing spotters. Use PassMed, QuesMed, BMJ on examination, all these question banks to apply your anatomy knowledge, and if you're doing well in those, you will be fine, because they are already the higher end questions. So hopefully that video makes anatomy a little bit more digestible for you. If you've still got questions on anatomy, you can contact me on my Instagram. I'm happy to answer any questions. I still have to learn like a level of anatomy. Obviously not as much as you guys do, but I still do. And you never truly finish with anatomy, unfortunately, but it's more like you just tend to come across it rather than you actually actively learn it. But yeah, it gets easier after year 2. There's not much forced anatomy, but please do work on anatomy. Take it seriously, because if you do well on anatomy, you're going to find placements and stuff are a lot easier. So I think that's everything I had to say. If you've got any questions, you can contact my Instagram, drop them in the comments down below, and yeah, subscribe, because we are almost at 1K subscribers, and I think that is now everything I've got to say. So I will see you all in the next video.